Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right, hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me, as he does each and every week here on That's Enough Out of You, is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on? How you doing?
Billy Reds, how you doing, buddy? We got a great show today, two great guests, and let's get right into it, bud.
Yeah, let's do it. We have joining us again for a kind of a second look. We did last episode we did with Paul Bleau. We had him on to kind of host a panel episode, which was really well received. We had a lot of great feedback on that, Paul. So and Paul, of course, one of the co-authors of the book Chokeholds. So welcome back to the program, Paul.
Hey, thanks for having us on. And you're right, that was a great show. And it's part of our research, by the way. So thanks for supporting the work Jeff, myself, and Dave Boylan are doing. And I think you'll enjoy hearing from my colleague Jeff today. So,
yeah, absolutely. And welcome, Jeff Meek. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate the chance to visit with you guys.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Jeff, why don't you kind of give a little bit about your background?
Okay. Well, I was 30 years in education, a teacher and a coach and athletic director. And me jumping into the black hole of the Kennedy assassination started in 1975 when Mr. Groden showed the Zapruder film on Goodnight America with Geraldo Rivera. And I didn't know any of that. It just all came out of the blue. And I'm kind of a guy, when you start to get interested in something, it's jumping in with both feet. And so I listened to the next program that Rivera had on 3 weeks later, and I went and got some of the books that they mentioned, and I looked in the back at the footnotes and still wasn't convinced. So I wrote to Washington for the records that were mentioned and saw that what they were saying was true. And 9 months later, I started meeting with Mary Ferrell. I drove down to Dallas, interviewed police officers and so on, and was an active researcher and reader from 75 to about the mid-90s. And then our son joined the Marine Corps, and my wife and I both of us wanted to know what our fathers did in World War II. So I spent the next 15 years or so investigating World War II and learning about it. And I wrote 2 books I did over 400 veteran oral histories.
Wow.
I put those into books. Probably the first 200 were all World War II veterans, and they're all gone now.
Wow.
When the documents started coming back out, or started being released in 2017, that spurred my interest to get involved again in terms of actively researching. And those first couple of interviews I did shortly after that were with Secret Service agent Mike Howard and Ruth Paine and Buell Frazier. And I worked for the Hot Springs Village Voice newspaper. I used to be managing editor there when I lived in Hot Springs Village. But when our son moved from California here to North Texas, we moved here to be closer to family. And even though I'm 300 miles away, the new owner, who was a colleague of mine, brought me back on board as an assignment editor and correspondent. So I started doing the JFK Files column. for almost 4 years now, and it's a book mostly of interviews with, you know, people like Dan Hardway and Leslie Weiselman and Frazier and Paine and just many, many others. And then some of the writings that I've done, we included them in a book called The JFK Files, Pieces of the Assassination Puzzle. So I'm still doing that for the Hot Springs Village Voice. My next one will be about Guy Bannister. Spending some time
Right.
with Janet Bannister right now.
Oh, my goodness.
And I also I won't go into the details because it'll take too long unless you want the details. But one thing led to another, and I've started writing for George Magazine.
Yeah.
The newspaper that JFK Jr. started back, I think, in '85.
Mhm.
And then it went out business there for a while after his death, and has been back in publication now for approaching 3 years. And I was contracted to do a 3-part series on the assassination. Parts 1 and 2 are in print. Part 3 will be out very shortly. And just today I confirmed with the CEO of George Magazine that I'll be doing another 3-part series.
Wow.
Wow.
So busy writing about a lot of different things, lots of irons in the fire, including helping Paul as he sees fit. Paul and I met at the last Lancer conference, and we kind of hit it off right away. And glad
Especially that you bailed me out. So,
wasn't a problem. I'll do it again in November if it needs to be.
yeah, I won't.
Okay. But so yeah, lots of irons in the fire, lots of interest. Spent many, many years doing this. Written 4 publications on the Kennedy assassination. They're all on Amazon. If you type in Jeffrey L. Meek, you'll see all the 6 books that I've done, 4 on JFK and 2 books of oral histories with military veterans, which I also still continue to do for our newspaper, the Hot Springs Village Voice.
Excellent.
Can I mention something about Jeff? And you know,
Depends on what it is, Paul.
oh boy, this is making it that hotel scene sound a little bit raunchy, but it's nothing like that. It had to do with my debit card not being accepted down there for some reason, and it was like 1 a.m. But look, we won't go there. But I hadn't met Jeff face to face. He had interviewed.
We did an interview. Yeah, we did an interview.
He had interviewed me,
right.
and I'm covered in one of his articles. The other reason there are 2 things that Jeff did that I really appreciated. One is for the documentary that Jim DiEugenio produced, JFK Revisited. I heard Jeff. What he did made its way, I think, into Jim's book, but it didn't make its way into the documentary because it was a bit late in the game, I think.
It was, that's
But
right.
Jeff is someone who people, if you read the book, I bought Jeff's book, I read it, and I've seen his interviews, and he has this style about him that is perfect for the project that we're working on, because we're doing research. And the research involves interviews and interview analysis and so on and so forth. So when I read Jeff's book, I was just amazed. I mean, just recently, he interviewed Judge Griffin, right? Griffin, which is a coup, because Griffin is, one of the originals from the Warren Commission.
Burt Griffin.
Wow.
Yeah, Burt Griffin, who was involved in the whole analysis of the Jack Ruby aspect of the assassination, and that must have been extremely interesting. But when I read the book, I was seeing people from the HSCA he interviewed, and look, it was Dan Hardway. And what happens is, you can sense that sometimes there's a little bit of resistance when the interview begins, but when they get into it, they just feel like opening up and talking. So that's really ideal for a research situation. Second thing, I'll go ahead, Jeff.
I think to your point, Paul, I think when they realize I'm not there to try to make them look bad or something, I'm just trying to gain information.
Right.
And my style is I'm going to share with you what I learned. You can agree with it. You can agree with the interviewee, or you cannot. That's completely up to you. That's how, now, when I started with the newspaper, I had no journalistic background. I
Yeah.
was an athletic director and a coach, and I learned from the ground up and on the fly that my boss at that time was formerly with the Philadelphia Inquirer and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and he emphasized to me that as a reporter, you're a fly on the wall. You
Yeah.
record the news, you don't make the news. So that's the style of our newspaper.
Right.
I believe that's the style of George Magazine too, by the way. And that's my style. I'm gonna ask you questions. I enjoy interviewing people on both sides of the argument, like Judge Griffin. He and others that I'm interview. Believe in the lone nut theory, and that's okay. I just like to get these people's thoughts and put them out there.
Well, this is what I was going to say. So for the book Chokeholds, the JFK assassination chokeholds, I was working on a chapter called Proof of a Front Shot. And Jeff, by speaking, get this, sir, this is, I think, really a coup. By speaking with the daughter of an FBI technician who worked on forensic analysis of the clothing, in other words, finding residue, metallic residue on clothing among those who were, Connally and JFK in the motorcade.
Right.
So he got a report, and it's the original handwritten report from the daughter of the FBI technician that says this. It says that they analyzed JFK's collar and his necktie, because the bullet is supposed to have gone through his necktie and his collar. So here's what the analysis in a nutshell says. It says, hey, you know what? There's metallic residue on JFK's coat. There's metallic residue on Connally's coat, but there's no metallic residue on the necktie or the collar. So we had Brian Edwards, who was a criminologist who
Right.
I think out of Kansas City, analyze that for us. The meaning is that the single bullet would have left residue on the tie and the collar,
Right.
but didn't. Now, that little scribbled handwritten report that Jeff got his hands on, we were able to put in our book Chokeholds with the permission of the daughter. And that to us was a coup, because that was just one of 10 things that proved there was at least one front shot. Okay, I mean, there are many other things.
And Chokeholds is the only place that document has ever appeared in public.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So that's gives you the background of before that snafu in Dallas. That gives you a little bit of the background of when we met, and we had a chat, and Dave Boylan was down there, and the three of us got together and we said, hey, look, let's get together and do a research project. And let's try and see where the community of researchers, where do they align and where do they not align? Okay, and we're breaking it down into 4 areas, as you guys know, Bill and Sean. The first 2 areas that we researched were about, well, why was Kennedy assassinated? And when did things fall into place? When did things roll out for it to take place? So we looked at timeline and motive. And then we looked at later with other research, tools, surveys. We looked at how was he assassinated, and I think we'll discuss this on your show, as well as, well, who are the persons of interest in there. And I think because of the trust factor around Jeff, Dave, myself, I would say, but we're getting such huge participation. We're getting You know, when you can say that you have between 120 answers to a survey and 150 out of, out of 600 people who've received a request, and these 600 people are really high level, recipients, because we measured how many books they read. Most of them have read over 30 books. A great majority have. Most of them have attended at least 3 conferences. A lot of them have read the actual reports, like the HSCA reports from the investigations. So we're talking about a knowledgeable audience who've read all the books and are saying, here's what we think about all this. And it's an amazing experience. And then what we do is we take the topics and we interview people like on your show and say, hey, Mr. Newman or Mr. Morley or Mr. DiEugenio or Larry Hancock and Greg Burnham and people of that ilk. We're saying, okay, talk to us what you think about the motive. Because we know when you can bring in top level specialists that can add a little bit more depth to a survey. A survey you can't really talk around. It's usually close-ended questions, so we do have some open-ended ones. So I think that trust factor, one person who looked at it, he says, you know what? I don't think this has ever been done before, where you have that many people weighing in on, on really what we should be looking at this point after 60 years. We should no longer be debating proof of a conspiracy. We should really be trying to figure out what the heck happened.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're not far. We're not far. And I'll tell you about the results. We have a good idea. In my view, the assassination is largely explained.
Sure.
But you may not have the nuts and bolts.
Don't have all the pieces, but yeah.
Yeah.
You got an idea.
I thought I'd mention that to talk about what how we got together. And Dave, the reason you don't see Dave on there, but Dave is known as one of the best data miners out there. I don't think anybody goes through as strong as Jeff is in interviews. Dave, when it comes to going over the declassified documents and going over files and finding profiles of people, he's amazing.
Yeah, he's a document hound, that's for sure. And if I might add,
Sure.
Paul's our effort to do these surveys is, I think, unprecedented. The only other thing that I can recall that comes close was a survey that Gordon Winslow, I don't even know if that's a name you guys know, from back out, lived in Florida. He sent out a survey. It was in the late 80s or early 90s, and I still have it, and I still have the cover letter, and it went out to what he called the 150 most knowledgeable people. So that went out to 150 or so. Paul, what are we at, like 600 or something?
Well, you see there's 2 things, right? It's 600.
Yeah.
And the names come from many years of acquiring them from mailing chains. One place, guys, where our community is not careful is an awful lot of them don't know about BCC or CCI. So they often put the names, but when you get these chains that come out, we always ask one question in each survey to see how knowledgeable they are. And we often, most of the time we have something where we offer a I don't know, like to the response, answer yes, no, this, I don't know. And I think people are really honest when they don't know, or they'll say it. And the other thing too is that we're getting an awful lot of interesting comments, either in the surveys themselves or in the emails. Like, did you think of looking into this? Did you think of doing that? And that's helped us shape subsequent surveys. So some of the questions come from actually the recipients. So that's I don't think How many answered, Jeff, out of the 150 he targeted?
I don't remember. If my memory serves me correctly, he did send out results, but I don't think he mentioned how many actually responded. The point I hope I'm making is that the depth and breadth of what Paul has put together here in terms of just the numbers there's not, to my knowledge, has never been done to that depth. And I think the fact that we've been successful in getting so many responses has been very interesting. I've seen almost zero negativity about why are you doing this.
Enthusiastic.
Like, this is fantastic, and I'm glad you're doing this, and this hasn't been done before, and here's what I think. And so we're off to a great start, I'd say.
Yeah, just so you know, for your audience, so if they want to, and it would be a good thing that they do this, if they go onto jfkchokeholds.com and they go into the media section, they'll find the results of all 4 surveys. So they'll see all the results, and often people, as we discuss, go to there and look at the charts, and they follow as we're talking. So
We'll add a link to that.
yeah. So if you go to the media section, we're really open about it, and we hope to present the results during the conferences in more detail, because we're going to add depth to that in the conferences in November.
And I would like to add, Paul, that I think another thing that you do a very good job of is you talk about openness. There are some, as you know, Paul, that have really pushed back and said a couple of instances have been some kind of ugly comments.
Yeah.
And Paul doesn't shy away from those. I mean, he acknowledges them. He's very cordial in his response, probably more so than I would be. But he's very open with all of this, which I think lends to its credibility.
Absolutely.
Do you need a new roof? Are you looking to repair damage to an existing roof? Call the roofing professionals at Quality Roofing Express. Located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Quality Roofing Express is a certified Owens Corning contractor. We are an independent, family-owned business connecting with our community and providing quality work. Our expert team can install metal roofs, rubber roofing, or traditional asphalt shingles. Do you need chimney flashing? How about a new skylight to increase your home's value and let that natural sunlight in? At Quality Roofing Express, we do it all, even siding. Check out our website, qualityroofingexpress.net, or visit us on Facebook. Give us a call at 570-614-3914 for a free estimate today. Quality Roofing Express. We put a roof over your head. DK's Corner has moved. Come see us in our brand new location at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, right across from the Jessup Plaza. Enjoy a brand new menu with hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, delicious breakfast, including breakfast bowls and sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's famous Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos, and still the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570-209-0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. And DK's Corner now has beautiful outdoor seating for the summer. Don't feel like leaving the house? Call DK's Corner for delivery. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. DK's Corner, now in Jessup, Pennsylvania. That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Casa Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Casa Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events, now serving a full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Casa Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy and karaoke nights and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. And if you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off of your order. Located on Main Street in Peckville, Pennsylvania, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Case Quattro Winery for their support. And it's interesting, Paul, when we posted the show that we did with you, the panel episode, and then we've also done a couple other shows with you about the book Chokeholds. One of my wife's friends responded that she was involved with the research and the survey, which made sense because she definitely would be one I would want to talk to, and not just because her last name happens to be Kennedy, by the way, which is interesting. But Paul, I kind of want to point out, because some of our we may have some new listeners that may not be familiar with the book. Something that's really interesting about chokeholds is that any one of those points, any one of the chokeholds, disproves the lone gunman theory just on its own. And then, take into account the totality, all of them put together. It's just overwhelming evidence. And it's really an interesting concept to put those things together. I found it just fascinating.
I've seen, go ahead, Bill. I don't want to.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, Bill, I try and keep an eye on, like when some good books come out, there's often review bombs or, these attempts to, like when you go on Amazon, it's mostly really, really good. But every now and then you'll read something, and, sometimes there's good criticism that you have to be open to, but it's the nature of the beast to have people attack it, as they have every critic of the official story has been attacked for over 60 years. And I've been trying to find the weaknesses, and it's so, like, I mean, there are a number of straw man arguments. I'll give you an example. The first chapter in itself is, when you read just the number of insiders, right? What is the official? What is the official version of the assassination? Right. And people still stick to the Warren Commission, not realizing that there were 6 investigations, and that the HSCA and church committees and people involved in other they all think there was a conspiracy, or by and large they do. And that includes a heck of a large number of people involved in the Warren Commission.
Sure.
So I was watching one person, like, for instance, Sherman Cooper obviously doesn't believe the single bullet theory. He said it. Right. Okay, he has said it. He's on the record. Now, I've read things but he also said this, and he also said that, that he had a lot of confidence in the Warren Commission team and this and that. I don't care. Irrelevant. If you don't believe the single bullet theory, it's over. Game over. Right. Finished.
That's it. That's it. Yep.
If I might interject, Paul mentioned all these different investigations. That's my part 1 in the current series I'm doing for George Magazine. It's in issue 19. It covers all the different investigations. And I decided to do that up front because I felt a lot of readers, I think Paul just basically said it, they don't know about any of these other investigations.
Nope.
It's incredible to me how—
That's unbelievable.
That I'm amazed how many people have never even heard of the House Select Committee's investigation, let alone all the others. So that's where I started. So the first couple thousand words, part 1, and again, it's in issue 19 for anybody that's interested. You go to georgemagazine.com and get copies. It's all about the investigations. And then part 2 that's in print is about deception and threats and destruction of evidence. And then part 3 that's coming out very shortly is going to be on the who and the why.
Oh, that's amazing. And, what's great is what Jeff is talking about is something that's a little bit more mainstream too, right? It's not as mainstream as, some of the ABC or Fox, but to be able to reach a wider audience than those that we typically know, we can reach a heck of a lot people through podcasts and through certain websites and certain publications, but they tend to be, you know, niche. To be able to get mainstream, we're still working on that. We're still working on, you know, and we're not far away from, I think, serious, you know, I mean, I don't want to say serious media. I'm talking about more about mainstream media with large audiences,
Right.
that say, hey, you know what, these people aren't, you know, they're not, they don't believe in reptilian men or whatever. They make sense, you know. So that's where we hope to be at one point, but we're not far away from that, I think.
Yeah, and I know, Sean, I know you want to get going with the Who, but I you know, just mentioned, Paul, that you know, that the documentary about the Parkland doctors was on Paramount Plus, which is CBS. So, you know, we're getting there, right? I mean, we're close, right? It's close.
And JFK Revisited was on Showtime, and it's been still being rerun. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Sean.
So let's get into the who and the how, and let's start with the who. You want to talk about the survey on the who, Professor?
Well, you know what? Can I suggest we start with the how, because that will tell us who the who was.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'll tell you why. Okay, so when we got into the how, and chronologically, we began with the why, and then we went to the timeline. The third survey was on the how. Okay, and we wanted to make a difference between tactics and strategy.
Mhm.
So what I mean by tactics could be, well, did they use silencers? Did they, you know, was the epileptic fit from a guy a distraction, and so on? So we covered a lot of tactics, but we tried to nail down what the strategy was. And a strategy in this case, you know, if I can make the difference with the audience, is something that is, I would say, a lot wider in scope than just a tactic. So we basically wanted to know whether they felt, the recipients felt that the strategy being used, was it a ZR rifle strategy? Was it a Pathfinder strategy? Was it a Northwoods strategy? Or, you know, and then we look at others, and then another one was it a regime change strategy of the day, of that era, that was used to remove Kennedy? Now, it's worthwhile that I take a little bit of time to explain each of these strategies. Let's start off with ZR rifle. For your audience, ZR rifle was an executive action strategy written up most likely by William Harvey. We found some notes of his that, you know, were not much, but the notes that were found basically explained what normally you would do in a regime change if you're the CIA. So here are some elements of it. You would use surrogates. So you're not going to use the CIA people or employees themselves. You would use people who are on contract. So these could be people within the mafia. They could be people within revolutionaries. It could be people from the Cuban exile community who wanted the island back. It could be hitmen, hired hitmen. So the use of surrogates where you know, you could plausibly deny the hit by saying, oh, well, you know, wasn't us, was the mafia, wasn't the mafia. So they had to create enough distance there. The second thing you would often find in a ZR rifle strategy was a means by which, a stratagem by which you could blame the opponent for the assassination.
Sure.
And he clearly says this: we need to be able to blame the Soviets or the Czechs. Okay, and that's in his notes, William Harvey's notes. He mentions another thing. He mentions the importance of backdating files and going back and changing files, like 201 files. Right. So in other words, covering up your tracks. So they have to have that in mind when, so if you bring this to what happened in Dallas, right? Well, you have, we could either blame Oswald alone now, but more likely you're going to blame Oswald, who's in cahoots with Castro agents. And that's why they had him, hobnobbing and saying, hey, we went to Mexico City. He talked to the head of assassinations. He was part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, which was Castro's organization in the US. So the whole idea was saying, hey, you know what? Initially, they didn't want to go the lone nut route. They wanted to say Castro or the Russians, but Castro most likely was behind the hit. And they did an awful lot of things in that area. So those are...
if I might interject something at this.
Yeah, sure.
In reference to you're talking about William Harvey, and you've gotten some notes and all. And I, when I interviewed Dan Hardway, we talked about him going over to the CIA every day, Ed Lopez as well, and so on, and asking for these files. He told me in the interview that he several times asked for files on William Harvey.
He was denied.
And he never got them.
You want to see the files that aren't declassified, yeah.
So, you mentioned that there are, we've seen some. I tend to think that there's a lot more.
Oh yeah. Hardway is an interesting person. Again, he was with the HSCA, and he looked into the whole Mexico City part of things. And when he talks about Harvey as being a person of interest. Okay. And so, when you talk about insiders, you say, well, where was our investigation leading? And you want to talk about the who? Well, we'll get into the who later. So, that ZR rifle I've covered. Now, Northwoods was something a bit different. I mean, they overlap, right? Northwoods was something that the Joint Chiefs of Staff presented to Kennedy as a method of organizing an invasion or justifying an invasion. And it would have been something like, blaming the downing of an airliner or even an astronaut, an American astronaut dying, and getting something horrific of that nature and saying, hey, they were behind this. The Russians were behind this, or the Cubans were behind the downing of an airliner. And of course, Kennedy didn't want any of it. Pathfinder was more of something that was it was more of a strategy. I would say it was more of a tactic. It was like, here's how you take someone out. And they were organizing practice around crossfires to eliminate someone like Castro.
Right.
And the person involved in Pathfinder, one of the persons involved in training the hit squad was a guy called Jenkins.
Jenkins, yeah.
Yeah, Jenkins. So he's someone of interest, and I think it's Bill Kelly who's taken an awful lot of interest in Pathfinder. Then, of course, so all these strategies were scoring really high on the survey. They say, yeah, no, there's elements of ZR rifle in the assassination. There's elements of Northwoods. So the umbrella choice was, well, basically, were they using regime change strategies of that era, which is more general? And they said, yeah, that's what happened. So what the method, okay, the technique to remove JFK was a technique that they used in Guatemala. It was one that they use in the Far East, in Indonesia, and other countries, okay, when they would change a regime. These regime change specialists, this is what they would have applied, but internally.
Right.
Now, it brought in probably a little bit more complexity, right? Because, Kennedy was popular with the public, and you had to get the press involved, but so those strategies, if you look at the people who've read the most, and you say, well, in a way, like everybody likes to say it was too complicated to pull off. This was too complicated. How could you pull something like that off? Well, it has to be pulled off by people who know how to pull it off.
Sure.
So yeah, it is complicated, but they've done it before.
I was just going to say, and they have a lot of experience doing just that.
Right. Sure.
So that was the most revealing element in the I would say in the research that we did, and I found it fascinating. Other things that stood out. Okay. A lot of people believe that Oswald's Fair Play for Cuba Committee activities was not based on his ideology, right? That it was a manipulation tactic to make him look like he was pro-Castro and to be able to blame Castro. That is a clear thing that came out of the study. I mean, you had nobody saw his travels, or very few, to Mexico as legitimate. In other words, that he just wanted to go to Cuba to be able to go to the U.S. So I think many aren't even sure that he went. Okay, but the point is most people think.
Dan Hardway. I asked specifically Dan Hardway. So was Oswald in Mexico City? And this is is there a better source on Mexico City than Dan Hardway, or maybe Bill Simpich perhaps? But I said, so was Oswald in Mexico City? And he said, I don't know.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think Jeff, if you go beyond that though, and remember David Atlee Phillips in a debate with Mark Lane, apparently, I don't know if we have a recording of this, but apparently it's on the record that David Atlee Phillips in that debate said, I think at the end of the day, you'll find that he didn't even go to Mexico City. Now, I'm not, because I haven't heard or seen the transcript, but I know that Mark Lane has written that and has communicated that. And I think that if we, I'm missing some elements here, but I would say that the key thing is, even if he did go to Mexico City, it seems clear that someone impersonated him while he was there, or if he wasn't, because...
Or at Sylvia Odio's doorstep.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are too many FBI people who said, hey, we heard the tape. We had heard that tape. The tape that they claim to have erased, which is ridiculous when you think of, why would you erase the tape of someone talking to the head of assassinations in Russia? And that the guy who's calling is Oswald, who had gone to Russia for a number of years. I mean, it doesn't make sense to erase that tape. But it was likely not erased because when Oswald was interrogated in Dallas after he was arrested, there are too many FBI agents who said,
they heard him.
We heard the voice on the tape, and that wasn't Oswald's.
And Hoover said that too.
Yeah.
Hoover said that.
I think to LBJ.
He said to LBJ, yes.
Yeah.
And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grain. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grain sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy. Tom's philosophy is great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question about Mexico City? Because I know
Sure.
Mexico City is a real broad
Black
subject.
hole.
They take up the whole episode, but I don't want to do that. But just going back to John Newman's work on Mexico City, he talks about when Oswald was impersonated, he met Valerie Kostakov, who turned out to be Department 13, the head of the KGB's assassination unit. And if you listen to John Newman, he talks about how, when Angleton in the SIG are controlling Oswald's files and they split that file and they hide a lot of the information in it, like the Mexico City trip and the meeting Kostakov, you would have, if you go on that and you believe that setting up Kostakov, and John Newman calls that a virus, and hiding that virus, and that virus is going to create a cover up eventually. It would have to be, the conspirators would have to know who Kostakov was and his identity, and that goes to Operation Tumbleweed, and it would have to be somebody who was read in on Tumbleweed, and that would have been at the highest levels of national security, correct?
Sean explained the operation. What's it called?
Operation Tumbleweed was the operation against. I think it started out as an FBI investigation that later was taken over, I believe, by the CIA against the consulate of Mexico City, and this is the one that said that Kostakov was Department 13, the KGB's assassination unit. So if you're the conspirators and you're trying to impersonate Oswald and tie him to Kostakov to create that what John Newman calls a virus, well, you would have to know who Kostakov really is, that he's not just an attaché with the consulate, that he's really the head of Department 13. And that was known to very few people. And it would go back to that Operation Tumbleweed that actually knew who Kostakov's identity was at the time to tie him to Oswald.
Okay, so I agree with you. First of all, you'd have to know that. So therefore, you're talking about intelligence, right?
Sure.
Okay. And likely, let's not go far, David Atlee Phillips, right? Because he's got one of the top positions right in Mexico City. Pardon? Maybe Angleton, but David Atlee Phillips is right there, right in, and he's got his finger in every pie, right? And
Phillips was one of the guys in charge,
right,
down in Mexico City, and then there's Win Scott that Jefferson Morley writes about, and then Scott dies, and who shows up? Angleton.
So you're naming some of the.
He does a lot.
And just so for your audience, who is David Atlee Phillips? Well, first of all, Mexico City was an incredibly important city at that time. It's, you know, people talk about Casablanca during World War II. But Mexico City is where everything was happening when it came to South America, Latin America, Cuba, you name it. Now, what is David Adley Phillips's role in all these regime changes? It's propaganda.
Sure.
This guy's
Like
an yeah, well, he's an ex-ad guy and he's an ex-actor. Okay, he used to act in theater. And this guy's specialty was writing up scenarios. So he was developing a scenario, in my view, that you could blame Castro for the assassination. And he's also in charge of overseeing anti-fair play for Cuba committee activities.
Right.
Which Oswald supposedly is part of. Okay, so you have a person of extreme interest there. So the whole Kostakov scenario, I think, is written up probably by, as you say, Sean, someone who had to know who he is.
Sure.
And the most likely candidate, in my view, is David Adley Phillips. Now, a little tie into this is, what is Oswald's last letter? Oswald's last letter ever not written. This one is typed, okay? And it doesn't have the same number of mistakes he usually makes. And it's sent to the Washington Russian embassy. And it makes references to that meeting he had with Kostin. He doesn't call him Kostakov.
Right, sure.
He calls him Kostin, okay? Yeah. That was to set up a trace to say he was actually in the room with Kostakov.
Right.
Because, you know, he's not filmed in the room and he's not taped in the room.
Yeah, that's the paper trail.
Yeah, so that was a little paper trail. The Russians, when they got that, they said, oh shit, they're trying to set us up. And they went and told the FBI and the CIA, say, hey, look, we looked at this paper. And, you know, by the way, guess who found that document and provided it to intelligence? Ruth Paine. So that was a document that she found after the DPD had searched her whole house, and all of a sudden this latent document popped up in her apartment. So anyway, so yeah, in answer to
a Marina cookbook.
Oh yeah. I mean, so in terms of the how, if your audience goes to read that survey on the JFK chokeholds, they'll see all sorts of questions. For instance, here's a question. I want to make sure I get it right. Okay, so we asked, if forces trained to remove Castro were used to remove Kennedy, there was a rogue intelligence faction involved. Anti-Castro Cuban exiles were involved. Mafiosi were involved. Okay, so these are the types of questions we had. Soldiers of fortune were involved. Non-rogue CIA operators were involved. Certain members of the Dallas police force were involved. We're asking the audience to comment on that. And they have to answer anything between completely disagree, unlikely, likely, definitely, do not know. So you're going to get a heck of a nice, I think, snapshot of where the researchers are at on so many different tactics, strategies, motives, timelines. So we're talking about strategy here, you know. Listen to this. We are saying at least 4 shots were fired. What's your opinion? So just about everybody agrees with that, you know. The driver of JFK's limousine wittingly drove in a way to make JFK an easier target. We asked them to weigh in on that. Okay. Oswald went to the Texas Theater in the hope of meeting an intelligence contact. Because as you know, Oswald, when he probably suspected he was being set up. He
Right.
may have had instructions, say, hey, this is your meeting place. Okay, so that's a question. The Secret Service violently removed JFK's corpse from Parkland Hospital to ensure a rigged military autopsy. What's your opinion? So we have 45, listen to the last question. Risky witnesses were silenced. You know, that's it. So we have 45 tactics. We had the general strategies we discussed, but we actually go through 45 tactics and you know, and look at it. And then we open it up to short comments, and all the short comments are suggestions from the respondents. Say, hey, you should read this book, you should do this, you should do. So it's a very, very, I think, rich supply of, and look, I learned so much in this. And then I asked myself, okay, well, wait a minute, I thought this, why do most people think that? So it leads you to question. On most things, I seem to agree with the consensus. In my case, I'm talking about myself.
Right.
And I think there is a large consensus. So when you look at this, the consensus, I would say from the research community, is Kennedy was killed. Why? Well, because he was starting to be seen as a serious danger to national security, and he was going against established norms and a structure that included the CIA, the FBI. So that's what people think. Then when you say, well, when did they decide to take him out? Most people think that it built up with the Bay of Pigs and Vietnam and you name it. But after the missile crisis in 62, between the missile crisis and January 1963, within those 2 or 3 months, some sort of signal was given. Okay, so it was something saying, okay, get it done. He's too risky. Now, when you look at, go ahead, Jeff.
And I think Kennedy reinforced their fears with his June commencement speech, his peace speech.
Peace speech, yeah.
I mean, he was really an outlier at that time. Outlier. You know, just so many things going on with the test ban treaty and wanting out of Vietnam. You know, Kennedy showed as far back as 1954, that he was not an imperialist. In fact, there's a little book out about that right now.
Yeah. Very good point, Jeff. And,
Yeah, I mean,
Dave Boylan, by the way, says there's documentary demonstrations of contempt and hatred, like in meetings to minutes, and there. So it's not just speculation. According to John Newman, I think it's John Newman and Fletcher Prouty, I believe. But anyway, by January 1963 in Washington, he wasn't liked at all by the movers and shakers.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it's getting more and more clear. I think the research, if we can call it a community, although sometimes we sure don't act like one.
No.
I think the focus is shifted from how many shots and where they came from and all that to the who and the why and who's behind this. And I think part of that is a point you made, Paul, that it's pretty clear that there was a conspiracy, that it was not just one guy.
right.
If you want, guys, we can maybe go into the who at one point, because I think the why the how leads into, you know, if you have a how, it just makes sense
Right.
that the people who know how to do the how
Sure.
are the ones you should be looking at.
And when you're talking regime change, you would be talking about people like Phillips and Ed Lansdale. And Professor, I believe in the survey, the who, the usual suspects were the highest rated, right? Allen Dulles, Angleton, Phillips, Harvey. Who am I missing? LeMay, his name was up there high, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dulles.
Lemnitzer.
Lemnitzer, you're right. Lemnitzer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, so let me, without going through statistics on the who, I was more moved by the discussions I've had with some of the specialists than just the survey results. Because the survey results, you know, I think automatically when you've read a certain number of books, well, it's hard not to mention Phillips, Harvey, Dulles, and that gang. You know, if you've read the Devil's Chessboard,
Yeah.
or you know, some of Jim's books,
Sure.
but let me tell you where I come from. So if you're a researcher, you want to tap into the best minds out there. And the best minds, you know, like being a good researcher isn't just reading things yourself, it's understanding who knows what. And the way I see it, and maybe Jeff, tell me if you agree, but I see in the current crop of top researchers, I'm talking about those who've written incredible books: Jim DiEugenio, Joan Mellon, Bill Davy, John Newman, you know, and I'm not talking about proof, by the way, of assassination, because then you can get into the Dave Mantics and that guy. I'm talking about those who've tried to, you know, dig into. I see two factions, and if you go back to the whole JM wave area of research, that includes who? Dave Boylan. It includes Bill Simpich. It includes Jefferson Morley.
Larry Hancock.
Larry Hancock. Larry Hancock's amazing for that. Okay. Now, if I said, who are they disciples of? Like, who launched that whole area of investigation? I don't know if you have an opinion on that. I have my opinion. And I just finished reading his book a second time because I'm using it in the research. To me, it's Gaetan Fonzi. Okay, right. Gaetan Fonzi, if you look at what happened when he joined the church committee and then he worked later with the HSCA, he was told, hey, there's a lot of rumors and noise and leads coming out of Miami, right? And that's what got him into meeting Vesiana. He got to meet a whole bunch of people. Meeting Vesiana got him to meet David Atlee Phillips. He had to uncover the whole Morris Bishop alias being used by David Atlee Phillips. And if you look at the research that spawned from there, well, that's where you get the people, an awful lot of them who built around that, like Larry Hancock and the others.
Sure.
Now, go ahead.
If I might throw in a teaser.
Sure.
Gaetan Fonzi is my next 3-part series for George Magazine is on Gaetan Fonzi.
Oh, well, he's a hero for me.
I've spent, you know, and that's why I decided to do it, Paul. I just, I was going through some things, you know, those of us with this JFK disease, you know, we have a closet full of stuff or whatever, or books everywhere. Yeah. And I was going through some stuff and I pulled out the November 1980 Washingtonian magazine, where he wrote, you know, a very long article that he later expanded into his 1993 book, The Last Investigation. And I was so moved by reading all that again, I wanted to write about it. And Marie Fonzi and I have spent a lot of time on the phone. And the next series in George Magazine is going to be all about Gaetan Fonzi. And some of it you all know about because you've researched it. But there's going to be a lot of other information that I got from his wife that I think you'll find very interesting.
That is amazing. Okay, Jeff, that's why he became my new best friend.
And I have a credit card.
Okay, but now let me sort of zero in on the who again. So now you have, who do you think, if I can call him the mentor or disciple, who are Joan Mellon, William Davey, Melanson, Jim Eugenio, disciples of. I don't like the word disciples. It's if they don't have their own minds, but in other words, you work their work back. Where does it start?
Garrison?
Of course. And his incredible book on the Trail of the Assassins. What an amazing book. So I've read both of those recently. And what you have is two bodies of knowledge there, right? Because there's things happening in JM Wave, and there are things happening in New Orleans during the summer of 1963. Let's not discount Mexico City or Dallas, but if you figure out what's going on between these two groups, and how is the strategy being written up by David Atlee Phillips and others of his ilk, making its way to people like Clay Shaw, Guy Bannister, David Ferry, and all that. If you figure that out, okay, that's why you have to tap in to the brains of the minds of Jim DiEugenio and Larry Hancock, and that's why when you have people like that feeding you, and if you can merge those two, that to me will close a lot of loose ends.
Right.
It'll close a lot of loose ends, and they're less. By the way, we know now with George Ioannidis that there was a JM Wave presence in New Orleans. Okay, so we know that with George Ioannidis, and we know that George Ioannidis probably, he must have been coached by David Atlee Phillips, because he took over his role in Miami.
Right.
So, and then if you look at the DRE, which has a very strong presence in Miami, and they have their people like Rourke and other people, and then you have Carlos Bringuier, who's in, and don't forget the Rodriguez family. The Rodriguez family is an amazing story because, get this, Oswald, how does he meet Carlos Bringuier? Well, he first meets a guy called, I think it's Ernesto Rodriguez. And Ernesto Rodriguez is working in a translation firm. And Oswald goes there and says, hey, I'd like to learn Spanish. I would like to also help your community. Who should I meet? And Ernesto gets him to, he says, well, that might be the DRE and Carlos Bringuier. By the way, I'm summarizing.
And I might also add, if memory serves me correct, to go along with your point, Oswald meets with him about that and then never goes for Spanish lessons.
Okay, so now, who is Ernesto's brother? Oh, Ernesto's brother is right out of JM Wave. He's one of the top people who works with people like Morales and with a whole bunch. He's a top person who was spying for the Americans in Cuba. So he's clearly CIA. Are you going to tell me that, and then you can get to Ernesto's father. So if you get into the Rodriguez family and their proximity to Oswald, you start saying, oh, okay, well, here are the conduits that are going on. So that's why I think we talked a lot about the survey aspect of our research, but the interview aspect, when you talk to people like Jim, Larry, John Newman, Jeff Morley, and I hope Greg Burnham and others, we've spoken to others and we're going to add some others. Well, then you're getting insights that kind of, explain the whole template, the whole skeleton, but with a lot of detail also. And that's why I love also having someone like Dave Boylan, because Dave Boylan, when you get into the who, a lot of the people, the names that we put in the survey come from Dave Boylan. Dave says, well, you should ask a question about this Moore character. He checks all the boxes.
Right.
And not many people know who Moore is. Those who do think he's suspicious, but very few people know who Moore is.
When you mentioned the Rodriguez family, just so people don't get confused, that's separate from a name that I think some of our listeners would know is Felix Rodriguez.
Yes, it's separate.
Right.
Felix is also a person of extreme interest,
Sure.
right? who was involved in Iran-Contra. He said things very close to George Bush, by the way, not that I'm thinking that there's necessarily a meaning there, but he was one of the go-to people for these dangerous missions, and not just in having to do with Latin affairs, but having to do with Vietnam. He was in, so no, it's a different family.
Right.
And it's you can't explain those relationships of the Rodriguez family and the interaction with Oswald without saying, hey, something here is being planned. Something here is being, set up. I forget what the Rodriguez's name, the first name of the Rodriguez in Miami was, but clearly he must have had instructions for his brother.
And I think also to go along with the what you're mentioning here, Paul, is the extreme significance that DRE was to the CIA. $51,000 a month.
Oh yeah.
That's
yeah.
I mean, that's approaching like $500,000 in today's dollars a month.
Yeah.
That's insane.
And who launched the DRE? You know who launched it? It was David Atlee Phillips.
Yeah.
And David Atlee Phillips started up Alpha 66, which is Vesiana's group, the most violent group. So, when you say he has his fingers in every pie, you have so many links with it. It's incredible.
And you have Alpha 66 leaders meeting at a house in Harlandale in Dallas. So,
right.
Where Oswald is rumored to have gone to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
According to a Buddy Walters report, he was seen there by an informant. And when I dug into that, that's the last thing I've had published. It's just almost like a booklet rather than a book. His informant turned out to be his mother-in-law, who lived next door.
Walter's brother-in-law?
Buddy Walters' mother-in-law lived next door to these Cubans at 3126 or 3128, as Walters wrote it, Harlandale. Well, Buddy Walters' mother-in-law lived at 3130, and I think Harlandale. And I think the reason that Walters got the address wrong is he assumed that the house next door was 2 digits away, but down there, and I've been there.
Oh, that's interesting.
They're 4 digits away, just like where I live here in this Del Webb community. But, Vesiana, in one of the many times he met with Fonzie, he said that he never saw Oswald there. Well, that doesn't mean that Oswald wasn't there. And that makes me wonder if Vesiana was there, because Vesiana had spent time in Dallas and saw Oswald meeting with Phillips.
Right.
And I have trouble believing everything. Like, I think Vesiana told a lot, but I don't think he said everything, because one of the groups you would look to in order to remove Kennedy, because keep in mind, Alpha 66, when, what's his name, Fabian Escalante got a confession from one of the people, Fabian Escalante of Cuba, okay, who's high up in intelligence. The person who confessed to a plot to assassinate Kennedy to him was a guy called Tony Cuesta. Tony Cuesta was Alpha 66, and he knew Vesiana. And then the people who are said to have been spying or scouting Von Marlowe as a potential patsy for Los Angeles and were hobnobbing with Richard Case-Nagel were likely Alpha 66. And at Harlandale, you had Alpha 66 people, not only, right, but some were there. I think Oscabero or something like that. I forget his name. Orcabero, thank you.
Yeah, and he was also at Harlandale.
And we don't know the people who were in with the Oswald or Oswald impersonated with audio, but they could well have been Alpha 66 also. So So, so Alpha 66 is the group that is going against JFK's orders during the missile crisis to launch attacks on Cuba, to provoke something, to light, to light a spark to make things worse against the Kennedys' orders. Okay, and these are people who are answering to or working closely with Phillips.
And
That's Alpha 66. Okay, that's Alpha 66 again.
Yeah, and
So,
Bill Hart, during that time that you're mentioning that, the Kennedys wanting to calm the waters in Cuba, there's Bill Harvey again, sending in teams anyway.
Right. Yep.
so if you Sean, more importantly is what the WHO reveals in the interviews that we looked at. And the question I asked was, you have CIA has thousands and thousands of people. So I said, where do the plotters, where are they? What positions do they occupy within the CIA? He said, the answer that, he said, you have to understand that for covert versus pure espionage, but covert activities, then you go to covert activities in the Western Hemisphere, and then you get into regime change covert activities,
Right.
that type. That's where you'll find this group of people in JM Wave, okay? And the names that come back there are William Harvey. He was in and out of, Johnny Rosselli as a person who was often at JM Wave, Tony
Morales.
Sforza, Rip Robertson,
Right.
Morales, Phillips. So those are the
Shackley was
names.
in charge, right? Shackley.
Who?
Shackley was in charge. He was the chief of staff, right?
Yeah, Shackley, and he's covered in the last investigation. He was interviewed by
Sure,
Fonzie.
yeah.
But the damn problem was because of Blakey. Whenever they'd come to interview these CIA characters, none of them were under oath. None of them.
I'm
They didn't want to
I'm interviewing Mr. Blakey tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay. Well, he's changed his heart, though, his mind
Yeah.
about.
He realizes the CIA screwed him.
Yeah.
He did.
That's Enough Out of You is sponsored by Carfecta, Scranton's premier destination for finding the vehicle of your dreams. With a commitment to service, value, and selection, Carfecta is your trusted partner in every step of your auto purchase journey. Our sales staff will work with you to select the perfect vehicle from our diverse inventory. Our friendly office staff will assist you in securing financing and offering warranties. At Carfecta, our dedicated team is here to make your car buying experience seamless and satisfying. Located in Scranton, Pennsylvania at 220 South 7th Avenue, or call us at 272-770-0080 and check us out on Facebook. With years of experience serving the area, our dealership is dedicated to offering high-quality pre-owned vehicles to our customers. From the moment you walk through our door, we're committed to providing you with a great car buying experience. With our skilled sales staff and financing options, we'll help you get the vehicle you want at the great price you deserve. Visit Carfecta today and let us exceed your expectations. Are you thinking about selling your house? Well, Bob Connors, a realtor at Christian Saunders Real Estate, says, I can't sell your house, but I sure as heck can market it and get it from sell to sold. Call Bob today for great marketing and to get a ton of eyeballs on your house. Are you in the market to buy a home? Not sure where to start? If it looks like something you shouldn't buy, Bob's going to tell you that. Think you can't buy a house or have no idea where to start? Been there, done that. Bob will get you going in the right direction. You can reach Bob at 570-614-3624 or 570-335-9000. And you can find Bob on Facebook at Bob Connors-Realtor. Whether you call Bob or not, please remember, stay awesome, all you awesome humans, and be kind to each other. Bob Connors, the realest real estater. And thanks to Bob Connors and Christian Saunders Real Estate for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
I throw a name out here that doesn't come up, and I think, Professor, I'd be surprised if it's even in your survey because it doesn't come up in the JFK assassination that much, but it comes up in other assassinations. And somebody just got me down this road, and I've been talking to Lisa Pease about this person because she did a lot of work on this person concerning the the RFK assassination. And of course, when you talk about surrogates, this is a person that CIA used to set up the mafia plots with Castro. But I'm talking about Robert Mayhew. His name doesn't come up as much in the JFK, but I'd be interested in Jeff, since you're doing a lot of work on Bannister. I mean, a lot of this, you think about the Chicago connections here. And of course, there was the Chicago plot, and you have that person, Martinez, that was meeting with Dulles and Clay. And then you have Jack Ruby's from Chicago. And of course, Harvey has Chicago ties, and Bannister, of course. And when you talk about the FBI ties in Bannister, Harvey, and Mayhew, is there any overlap there? Is there any connection between the three? And Jeff, I'll be interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't want to give too much away until the article prints, but in speaking with Janet, the name that comes up more than any of those names in terms of a connection to Guy Bannister is Hoover.
Oh, interesting.
And when you read my article, you'll see what she has to say about what Bannister is up to.
Well, Bannister didn't he have a direct line right to Hoover? Wasn't there some where he was like really in contact with Hoover quite a bit? When he would, I'm talking about when he's in New Orleans and he's in his.
That's what Janet says.
Okay.
Well, I heard that they were close too. I read that, but I didn't realize how close. Here's a couple of things for your audience. Why, Sean, you're right to bring up Mayhew as a person of interest is that when it went through the Department of Security, right, the idea of making links with the mafia, Sheffield Edwards, right? Is it Sheffield Edwards?
Sheffield.
Yeah.
Sheffield Edwards, right, is the one I believe who contacted on behalf of Dulles and Bissell, Mayhew, right, to eventually set up the links with the mafia, which led to the meetings with Rosselli, which eventually led to meetings with Giancana and Trafficante and these plots to remove Castro. Okay, and I believe they were even started during the Eisenhower.
They were during Eisenhower. That's correct.
Now, the other reason I think it's interesting to bring them up is that the security company that was hired to protect RFK employed one of the top suspects to have removed him. Right. Eugene Caesar, right?
Yes. And I think Lisa Pease covers that great in her book. Yeah. She really covers, Mayhew. And don't forget, Mayhew, there's ties going back to the CIA with Sukarno in Indonesia and this was in the 50s when they were using Mayhew to try to they were setting up some kind of porn tape or something to try to, character assassinate Sukarno. And that was going back to the 50s. So there's a strong connection. And Professor, isn't there in QK and Chan, isn't there Mayhew's sons mentioned in that along with Clay Shaw?
Clay Shaw, right? I don't know about this. Yeah, that rings a bell. I wish
his son is mentioned in that.
I wish I could.
And E. Howard Hunt, I believe.
The fact that he had that clearance, right? Shaw said that he was more than just, one of these assets, right, for the CIA, right? But I wish I could give you more detail on that, but I can't. I've just heard of those intriguing links there, but
I think Mayhew's a name that really needs to be investigated more concerning JFK.
What's your take on Mayhew, Sean?
I think Mayhew is a perfect guy. When you talk about a surrogate, I think he's the perfect guy to go to because we know if, like I said, Lisa Pease, I think fingers him pretty good as the go-to guy in the RFK assassination. And I think, you know, they used him obviously with the mafia. I think every time you have an off the books operation where you don't want anything, and again, the legend is that the original Mission Impossible was based on Robert Mayhew. So when the government wants somebody to go to that they want, you know, no trace leads back to them, they go to somebody like
Yeah.
Robert. So I think his Chicago ties are really, really suspicious because, you know, you talk about the Chicago plot, and I'd be interested in knowing that Sierra Martinez, does he have any ties to Mayhew?
Oh, well, that's amazing. You know that Paulino.
Yeah.
Another one is Jack Ruby.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to find a link between Jack Ruby and Robert Mayhew. That to me would be
Well,
another big-
Let me interject there about the Chicago thing. One of my most recent interviews that has printed was with Vince Palomaro. And I don't know if you know or not, but he has a book coming out on the Chicago plot. And he told me he wouldn't tell me much about it, but he said he's gonna name plotters, and it's going to be a blockbuster.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. That's amazing that he'll do that.
Comes out in October, I think.
Because as you know, well, one of the chapters we have in Chokeholds is called the prior plots, right?
Yeah.
And we go into, and I've always thought that the prior plots would, you know, if you work them up, you'll go to the same sources, right? The same strategists. Because in many of the prior plots, not Chicago, but if you take Policarpo Lopez, Von Marlowe, even Harry Dean, you know what they have in common with Oswald? They're all linked to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
That's what our first interview was, you and me, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a David Atlee Phillips scenario that's popping up left and right here.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was for all practical purposes in 1963 dead. It was inactive.
Very, very much infiltrated by the FBI.
Exactly. So,
you know, another when we interviewed, you might want to talk about this, and I know we're kind of branching off all over the place, which is not hard when we get together like this. But Oswald talking about going to Washington. Paul, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the traces there were in letters he wrote to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and in the, some of the magazines, the communist magazines. He says, hey, I'm going to go to the Fair Play for Cuba, to Washington. I'm going to be moving there. And Richard Case Nagel, when he forewarned about an attempt on Kennedy, said that it would probably happen in the Washington area. Okay, so you had these traces. Then in Washington, approaching a motorcade in early October of a guy from India, Selassie, Ethiopian. He was the Ethiopian leader. There was a guy impersonating Oswald, acting completely, aggressively. He was making himself visible near the Willard Hotel. And the person who reported this behavior happened to be a chauffeur for someone, I don't know if it was a congresswoman, but this chauffeur eventually reported this story to, my God, what's the name of Vince Palomaro's Floyd Boring. Okay, to Floyd Boring. And Boring, so what they did is they actually created a trace around a potential assassination attempt in Washington, but it never occurred. So, it was kind of forgotten. But those traces that Vince Palomaro found of, again, someone, Fair Play for Cuba Committee, again, in this case, it's Oswald himself, but it's instead of being a Policarpo Lopez or a Von Marlowe or a Harry Dean, maybe we can tie Oswald to something that could perhaps occur in Washington. So what it looks like is that there were many contingencies. There were many plans to eliminate him, especially in the fall, because they really start multiplying in the fall, all these things, these attempts. So that's what it looks like. There's too much similarity there, but again, it's another false flag. And I think eventually, I think Dallas was their number one option, but they didn't, they probably had some dry runs, in other cities to say, hey, what if we do take him out, or what, many things may have been aborted before Dallas, but it had to occur around that time in Dallas because you were going into an election year, and the whole nature of Kennedy's travels would have changed by now.
Go ahead, Jeff. Were you going to say something?
Well, you have Illinois, you have Texas, you have Florida, all these plots, and Paul's done a lot of great work on that. I think it shows it's just my opinion, it just kind of shows the urgency of, we got to get rid of this guy.
Yeah, agree. Definitely. Let me toss another name at you guys. And I'm interested to know, I don't remember seeing the name on the survey, but what do you feel about Richard Helms' involvement?
That's a very good.
Certainly part of the cover-up.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Not about that.
I just bought a paperback issue of The Man Who Kept the Secrets. I need to reread that about, I think it was by Thomas Powers on Richard Helms. I will say this about Richard Helms, because in transferring from cassette tapes to CDs, I re-listened to Helms' testimony for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And what I came away with was this: the arrogance with which he testified, and no one on the committee pushing back.
Nobody, right?
And I'll throw out another teaser about what's coming up with my 3-part thing on Fonzie is, well, it's out there in his book, The Last Investigation. He talks about how the members of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, not the staffers, but the congressmen,
right?
How interested were they really in getting to the bottom of this? And Gayton writes about how they probably saw it as a minefield,
sure,
and a career ender.
Career ender, yeah.
If they didn't play ball,
yeah.
And Blakey had all these obligations to the CIA, which he 15 years later, thanks to Jefferson Morley, we find out that no wonder Dan Hardway couldn't get files on William Harvey. Joe and Eady's knew exactly what to keep from the committee.
What about when you're talking about the actual mechanics of the plot, and you're talking about the actual shooters? And I know a lot of people, we were talking about Jam Wave, and I asked this question before we went on the air, Professor, but we talked about, the anti-Castro Cubans and coming out of Jam Wave. But what about using the OAS in Souetre? Well, how do you guys feel about that? Jeff, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, it's back in the 70s, Mary Ferrell, myself, Gary Shaw, and Bud Fensterwald were hot on this Souetre thing. I can show you the letters. I still have them from Mary Ferrell that said, Jeff, you're the first to get some of this Souetre information. In fact, if you look at one of my books, The Manipulation of Lee Harvey Oswald and the cover-up that followed, in the background on the cover, you see a letter. And that letter, if you look closely, is from the CIA to me in 1978. And that's the cover letter that I got on Souetre documentation. I believe that he was in Dallas. I know that many great researchers don't, but I believe he was. I've talked numerous times with Gary Shaw. We both believe, if I may, Gary, that document that spells out that he was in Fort Worth and then Dallas, and then we hustled him out of the country. We feel that's an extremely significant document, and that may be released by accident.
I think
You know, the CIA definitely knew who Souetre was, because Souetre,
Dulles was very active with them, right?
yes, and Souetre approached the United States. I think the documents I have are dated April of '63, about getting help to oust de Gaulle.
De Gaulle, right?
So they definitely knew who Souetre was.
Bavaria. Yeah.
And, you know, Bud Fensterwald tracked him down. And of course, Souetre denied being there. And there's that whole quagmire of Mertz and Rowe and all that.
Yeah, that gets really murky.
But, you know, in the book Coup in Dallas by Albarelli, you know, Souetre's all over that Lafitte date book.
Well, I look, I think they have their little black book of saying, hey, we want 3 people shooting, right? Who do we have? Who's on our list? Is it QJ Win? Is it, you know, is it like, you know, they'll bring in a hitman every now and then. And you think of it, Harvey, when he's out in Rome, right? Maybe from his network, they're probably saying, hey, okay, this guy will cost 50 grand. We'll bring him in, but it's still going to be a ZR rifle strategy. And who the shooters are really is, you know, something tells me that within Pathfinder, there were people being trained. This is something that Dave Boylan and Larry Hancock brought up, is in Tipping Point, they talk about training that took place in the Keys and in the marshes and in Miami, and that the hit team disappeared and were not seen much before the assassination, and after the assassination, they disappeared also. So he's talking about a group of people within those they trained to try and shoot and kill Castro or others. So I just think that the people like Tony Sforza and Morales and Harvey, you know, say, well, who are the best people to carry this out? And whether the person is a hitman from the Philippines or from Corsican.
I think,
I mean, because Hunt said that Hunt many people discount E. Howard Hunt's confession to his son. I think there's an awful lot of truth in it. And he said Corsicans, right? If I'm not mistaken, Jeff, did he not say Corsicans were brought in?
I think didn't he say? I thought he said OAS. Didn't Dinkins the cryptograph? Didn't he finger the OAS though with Bannister and Harvey?
Well, the OAS is interesting, right? Because if you look at Permindex,
sure,
Permindex is Clay Shaw. Permindex is involved in regime changes in Europe, right? But not necessarily just assassination. They're linked to OAS backing in the attempts on de Gaulle. And who brings money to Permindex or to Rome at that time? I shouldn't say Rome. It's Gatlin, right? Gatlin, the lawyer from New Orleans, who's linked to Clay Shaw and Bannister and that gang, and then that guy ends up jumping out of a building or something. So yeah, there's an awful lot more to Clay Shaw in this whole thing. He's not, you know, I did an analysis of who was in the trademark, who were the tenants. Boy, it's not a normal cast of businesses, right? There's so many that are involved with intelligence.
Right.
If you look at the tenants in the international trademark, and you look at the board of directors, and you look at all that, it's an organization that you look at and say, okay, there's more to it than, you know, when you think that Oswald, when he traveled to Europe to go to Russia the first time, he used a travel agency from within the international trademark.
Before we leave the topic of shooters, I think in that discussion, at least to some degree, you have to mention Roscoe White. I spent 2 weeks ago, I spent several hours with Ricky White in his home, sitting 2 feet away, and saw the Roscoe White Marine's trunk and the canister, and sat there with Ricky and Tricia for a couple hours, and they are so convincing in many ways. But one is how they didn't go out looking for notoriety, and how this just all fell in their lap, and they found it hard to believe. And they talk about being threatened. Even since the book Admitted Assassin has come out, they have received a threat. I'm also writing about that in our newspaper. And they're just so convincing. And how Tricia talks about how she was followed once, and she kind of turned the tables and got behind the car and wrote down the license plate number and found out it was from a rental agency that leases only to the FBI and the CIA. I mean, there's so much convincing, at least circumstantial evidence to in my opinion, you have to put Roscoe White in the mix in terms of shooters. And Gary Shaw and Brian Edwards and Ricky have written a really good book called Admitted Assassin. I don't know if any of you have read it.
I haven't read it. I heard them talk about it in Lancer, right?
Yeah, it's worth your time.
Interesting. What else do you want to mention, Professor? What didn't we cover yet? Any names?
No, I think
of interest?
Why don't if I were to just say where I think the community agrees in a nutshell, if I summarize that, I think that you'll get an agreement that Kennedy's foreign policies and some of the decisions he was making regarding the CIA, the structure, brought an awful lot of very powerful people to believe that he was a national security risk. The missile crisis, they were furious that the missiles made their way into Cuba under his watch in the first place. So they don't see him as a hero for having, avoided World War III.
Sure.
So the second thing is the decision by people powerful enough to make sure the assassination would take place probably occurred somewhere between the missile crisis, somewhere between November 1962 and January 1963 at the latest. They agree that they looked into their successful regime change strategies that they had used with foreign governments and brought them and used them internally. They agree that the persons of interest, in most interest in here, you would have to look into who the regime change operators, and Larry Hancock talks often about a cadre of like-minded people who, just click. And you can trace these people way back to, was it 53 or 54, when Arbenz was removed in Guatemala. And these people stayed in cahoots with one another or in the same network when the Bay of Pigs came around, when, other regime change operations took place. And that involved propaganda, it involved blaming the opponents, it involved, so I think in a nutshell, then, we can get into specific persons of interest, and you're right, people like Harvey, Morales, Dulles, are names that come back often. But so that's, like if people wanted a 5-minute explanation of what happened on November 22nd, okay, 1963. Within these surveys, you can probably present something that's quite plausible. But will you have all the details and all the, the nitty gritty and the exact timeline? No, not yet. But
to that point, Paul, I think of what Jeff Morley used to say when asked, so who killed President Kennedy? And Jeff said, I don't know. It's too early to tell. 60 years.
Yeah, 60 years.
Wow.
Let's one name we touched on earlier. Let's talk about him a little bit more, but Lansdale. What's your feelings on General Lansdale? Because we know he's involved in regime change operations before. And one of the interesting things is, of course, Fletcher Prouty's ideism is in that picture. But even more interesting, the work of John Armstrong. He really identified, Captain Westbrook from the Dallas Police. He really puts a really suspicious finger on him all around the J.D. Tippit murder. And of course, Westbrook would end up over in Vietnam, training their secret police over there. So we know Lansdale was over there at that time too, as well. So what do you guys feel about Lansdale?
Well, if I may, Lansdale's interesting, right? Because he was brought in to be on the Mongoose team, right? Operation Mongoose. And Harvey was on the Operation Mongoose team, but then he was exiled. So
Harvey and Lansdale hated each other.
Yeah, but here's the thing is, whatever regime operations were in the works and the techniques they used in Latin America, Lansdale was as strong, right? And used similar techniques in the Far East. So he was a person of the ilk of David Atlee Phillips, and the interesting thing is, when you look at a conduit, right? If you look at Newman says the CIA would never be the organization that would have pushed for the change. He says it's the military.
Because they wouldn't do it without the military's permission, so to speak.
Yeah. So he says it has to start with the military. I mean, regime change it originates not from the CIA, but from the military. So the conduit that you have, where you have people like Fitzpatrick and, some of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is in that committee that was trying to tackle the Castro situation, right? And then that could work its way down through Lansdale. So he's a candidate.
Was Lansdale really a military guy? Or
No, but he in other words, I would think he was always intelligence, this guy. But what I'm saying is that the conduit to go from military to the CIA, concocting something, you have an interesting conduit right there, which is, and that's Dave Boylan who brought that up with me. He says, if you want to look at Fitzpatrick, an important guy, people like Lemnitzer and LeMay, and that conduit through Lansdale, it's an interesting one. Now, a lot of people think that the conduit was through Dulles, so that exact conduit is hard to figure out. Prouty is convinced, and others, right? Kulak are convinced that was Lansdale in the picture with the three tramps.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
But we know he was in the area that he was in Denton, Texas. I believe that's been confirmed. I believe John Newman was one that confirmed that. So we know at least he was in that area right around that time.
But Harvey showed up suspiciously and was seen in Dallas some 2 weeks beforehand, and the guy who saw him was one of his colleagues in Rome.
Right.
That's in the Devil's Chessboard.
What the hell's he doing in Dallas?
And what is Paulino Sierra Martinez doing meeting Alan Dulles?
And General Clay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So he meets so you have all, there are a lot of candidates, but what they have in common is regime change, knowledge and skills that aren't questionable.
Experience.
Yeah. People often say, well, how could all this group, get together? And no, this is a group.
It's already together.
They're already together in Cuba.
Yeah.
The
They've been
mafia,
for years.
the mafia, if you look at the people of interest in the, Eladio del Valle, Frank Barthez, all these people in Cuba were in with Batista, the mafia, and the CIA. So when they get to Miami, they coalesce again. I mean, the Cuban exiles were all organized under the CIA, an umbrella that had all these groups that they'd finance, the DRE, the Alpha 66. They were being thrown into the military. So it's a natural network. It's not one that came together all of a sudden out of the blue.
No.
Already in
Absolutely.
place. Already in place.
Right. All right, Paul and Jeff, we have taken up a lot of your time this afternoon. We really, really appreciate you coming on with us. This has been another amazing episode, fascinating. Jeff, it was wonderful to meet you, and highly. And it's funny, Sean and I were just talking a couple of weeks ago about because it was D-Day, so we were talking about the World War II generation, how those folks are almost all of them are gone. So we definitely recommend your books about World War II and look forward to your articles coming out in George Magazine also.
Yeah. If you go to georgemagazine.com, my first series is in issue. They don't put date on them. They put an issue number, issue 19, 20, and 21. And also at georgevideo.com, you can see a podcast I did with the CEO and their editor-in-chief. And for those who are kind of newbies to the whole thing, the George Magazine series is a good primer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, well, it's great being on your show, guys.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
keep up the great work. I'm hearing so much good stuff about the people who go on your show, and I hope anyway you keep up the great work because you ask the right questions, and I think you do a good job interviewing people. So thank you.
Well, we'd like to do it again, and if Jeff, if you want to come back, maybe next time, Professor, we could get maybe Dave Boyd.
Yeah.
Because he was supposed to be on this one, so it'd be stuff that'd be great.
Yeah, he's an amazing document hound. He's terrific.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic.
Yeah. Great. All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.